who's really leading the new space age? It's not NASA, and it's not the nation states. It's the Silicon Valley's daredevils. Ashlee Vance is a renowned investigative reporter and the man who took you inside the mind of Elon Musk. His latest book is an intimate report on the wild west of aerospace engineering. So join us as Vance takes us on an unprecedented journey into secret space labs, private jets, and even espionage. Welcome everybody to an out-of-this-world adventure with one of my favorite authors and raconteurs, Ashlee Vance, joining us from the same golden state that I'm within. He is within a deep and illustrious valley. How are you today, Ashlee?
I'm good, man. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I love your writing. You're a consummate storyteller. You get access. You have a congenial kind of attitude that answers the questions both from experts, quote unquote, like me, all the way down to the man on the street. And as I mentioned before we hit record, I love to take my readers, and my listeners who are book aficionados on a journey into the cover and how it came to be, because they are the heroes of the story, but you always take people on a hero's journey. And this particular adventure book has many adventures written into it. So Ashlee, please, if you would, hold up the book, explain the cover art, explain the title, and most importantly, the subtitle. And what was the inspiration for all these? And you cannot say my publisher forced me to do it.
I will not say that. I picked this title, When the Heavens Went on Sale, pretty explicitly. Part of what I was trying to do in this book was, I thought, call a moment. People have been writing about commercial space for a while, obviously, but there really hadn't been what I saw as like a book that really defined this moment in time. Some people who I was writing about thought the title was quite cynical and see themselves more as idealists and, people out to help the world. And I do see, so I see a lot of that going on, and the book is mostly optimistic, but I did think this was a moment in time when commercial space became real. I had, for the image, we went back and forth on a ton of images. There's all kinds of cool stuff to play with, but I knew I wanted a new space rocket as opposed to an old space rocket. And so we found, this is a rocket lab, rocket launch out of New Zealand. And it was a pretty sort of like a quasi amateur photographer who had just taken this beautiful shot. And so I love it. And, the Misfits and Geniuses part is just that was to reflect, again, sort of this new moment in space when it has a bit of this like Wild West feel to it. And so you got to mix. Part of the book is about, it has a lot of the idealism of old space, but also this moment in time when some of the idealism goes away and business triumphs over some of our past notions around space.
One of the things that reminded me of, the picture reminded me of Neil deGrasse Tyson's Accessory to War. I don't know if you've read that book, but
I haven't.
That's all about how astronomers have participated in the man's second oldest business, which is warfare, of course. And so there's similar kind of arching image and so forth. But I love the book. I love the introduction, I think, that you narrated. I listened to the audiobook. I have the hard copy, and I was lucky enough to get one of my undergraduates, one of the most brilliant people on earth, Charles Cody, who took my cosmology class this year. And I shared with, you get all these books as a podcaster sent to you, and your publicist was kind enough to send me your book. And so I listened to it. I already bought the Audible copy. So I gave it to him, and he generated 4 pages of notes. So we're going to take his question as well as some generated from the audience. But the very first, kind of thing I wanted to get into is Pete Worden, who I think I might have met maybe at the SETI Institute. Do you know if he's affiliated with the SETI Institute up there?
I don't know how closely affiliated, but it's right by NASA Ames, and I know he's had overlap with them over the years.
So I think I met him. I've spoken there a couple times. He's a great individual. Talk about his work, his impact, how much of an influence this relatively unsung character is in the unfolding, modern history of commercial spaceflight.
Yeah, I mean, Pete's one of my favorite characters, and he seems to be a lot of people's favorite character in the book. I mean, like you said, a relatively unknown figure, especially outside of space circles, but what an incredible life. He's got a PhD in astrophysics, but he became a brigadier general in the Air Force. Did a lot of pretty controversial things over the years, some black ops stuff. He ran the Office of Disinformation for a while until the New York Times learned about it and had it shut down. For that, he was fired by Rumsfeld and George Bush, but his reward was being granted the NASA Ames Center here in Silicon Valley and being made director of that. And so, for about 30 years, Pete had been in the U.S. bureaucracy, military, and in space, and just felt like people were doing things wrong, that rockets could be smaller and cheaper, that satellites could be smaller and cheaper, that space could be cheaper in general. And he really, NASA is ironic that he became a NASA director because NASA sort of hated him for publicly lambasting them for being for all their costs and bureaucracy. So when he gets this NASA center in the early 2000s, this is his opportunity to put into action all these things he'd been dreaming about for a long time. And he brings in a bunch of 20-somethings from outside of NASA career jobs, and he tells them, go do space differently. I'm going to hide you in some closets some of the time so people don't find out that you're trying to make stuff cheap, like a cheap lunar lander, very cheap satellites. And he literally had to hide these projects from people, otherwise they would shut him down. And so, at NASA Ames, he has this, what I deem like a huge success in the furtherance of commercial space. Obviously, you had Elon in the background starting SpaceX around the same time. But I would argue after Elon, at least philosophically and in some of this action, Pete probably did as much to push commercial space as anyone else.
Yeah, you know what I love about the phrase, commercial spaceflight that just resonated with me throughout the book was those two words, commercial and spaceflight. And those are very different skill sets, right? The ones that kind of like me, the geeks and the nerds, look through telescopes, think about being, the properties of exoplanets and life on other planets that hopefully we'll get a few minutes to chat about before the hour's up. And then the commercializers. And those are very different skill sets. I wonder, shining through here was that story, and also the story, kind of the difference in approach between the former Soviet Union, maybe even the pioneers of the rocket equation and so forth, and the communist approach and the capitalist approach. What are the if you had to choose one, Ashlee, would you choose maybe there's a 2x2 matrix, communist, capitalist, scientist, businessman or woman? Where is the optimal place in that matrix, or is there not such an answer to such a question?
I mean, it's probably ultimately a vague answer. In the book, I borrow from this guy, Alex McDonald, who's an economist at NASA, who makes a really compelling case, I think, that space took this bureaucratic, if you want to call it, sort of communist turn as a result of history, World War II and the Cold War and space becoming this point of national pride. And so you had to deal with humans mostly. You had to make rockets that wouldn't fail because you'd be embarrassed for your whole country. So this became the stuff of government projects, billions upon billions of dollars. Things went great for a while, and then it gets cemented, and you can't take a risk anymore because you don't want to be the guy that changes something and embarrasses the country and risks your job. And we got stuck there for a really long time. If you look at SpaceX now, to me, it's hard to argue against what a for-profit business is. I mean, SpaceX is running laps around the entire rest of the world at this point in terms of launches, rocket families. It's now the biggest satellite manufacturer the world has ever seen. And so if you had asked me that question 10 years ago, I feel like it'd be harder to answer to me now. But also, SpaceX is sort of an anomaly. I mean, out of all the billionaires, they're the only ones that have really succeeded. But man, they've succeeded on such a level that I don't think the world has really ever seen before.
And an ally question with that, when I look at Bezos and I look at Branson, and they play roles obviously here, but I don't see the same kind of passion, base level passion for the science or maybe the mission, or as Simon Sinek would say, the why, of this. Where do you rank them, these billionaires and Bigelow and all sorts of other characters? Where do you rank them in terms of their fundamental curiosity, which is a huge hallmark of my audience and myself?
I mean, Bigelow seemed to have this like intense interest, and I think Bezos, this appears to be like now his life passion, but something has gone amiss because, Blue Origin started right before SpaceX. And if you look at those two companies, I mean, it's like you can't even compare their track records. SpaceX is so far ahead. When Elon first started SpaceX, he was not nearly as rich as he was today. And I think there's something to be said for he had to make the business actually work. It was not going to just be funded by billions of dollars from him in the early days. And I think that gave SpaceX this urgency. It comes down to that urgency, I think, because you can be a dreamer. If you don't have some sense of immediate purpose and urgency, you end up looking like a government program because you have limitless funds and you don't have consequences to what you're doing. So that seems to be some of the recipe. Same thing for Rocket Lab, which is one of the main companies in the book. Peter Beck, this guy in New Zealand, had to make this work. I mean, he was not rich. This was like a guy who didn't even go to college. He was working at a dishwasher appliance maker, and so he had to make this work. So there was no other choice. And SpaceX and Rocket Lab are far and away the most successful commercial rocket companies. So that seems to be, to me, this driving force.
Yeah, when I think about Elon, I'm hoping to talk to Joe Rogan soon, and I hope to, bring up this topic with him. His so-called dream, Elon's dream to die on Mars. And of course, you've written this wonderful book with 40,000 reviews. I mean, that's the square of the number of reviews of all of my books. It's just, I think if you have more than 1,000 reviews, Ashlee, you're basically set for life. So you've got 40 lifetimes worth just from this one book, and now your newest wonderful book, When the Heavens Went on Sale. But if I could ask Elon one question, it would be, which of your kids are you not going to take with you? Which of your kids are going to attend your remote funeral here on Earth when you die? As he's claimed he wants to die on Mars. I hope it's not on impact, as Martin Rees would say. But tell me, what you know him probably better than any average or citizen. Obviously, such unprecedented access. What does it mean to say you want to die on Mars to a father of 10 kids? I've got less than that, but fewer than that, not by much. But but tell me, what does that mean? Who is he going to leave behind? It was just a practical question.
I mean, Elon's always said that line. I never know fully how seriously he takes it. I've been sort of surprised that as SpaceX has gotten so much better with taking humans into orbit on some of these missions, it's at the point now where Elon could definitely take one of those rides without, not a crazy amount of risk, really. And he's chosen not to. I mean, Elon's always positioned that as like it's the same as going to conquer the new world, and the people who go on those first journeys are in for a rough time of it, and you're sort of sacrificing your life for this greater good. When I talked to him, because he had that quote in my book, I mean, I don't think he pictures this. What is he now? He's about like 52 or something like that. I don't think he pictures this until he's pretty ripe. I think it's a bit of like a last act, because Elon tends to view himself as pretty essential to his companies. I get the deeper point of your question, but sometimes I think it's more philosophical than real at this point for him.
Yeah, I mean, the deeper thing, which he may have talked about with you as well, is extending consciousness in the solar system. But, I always point out there's a lot of consciousness, there's a lot of life here on Earth. And as they say, we know the surface of Mars better than the surface of the ocean floor. So we're going to make an impact. But I don't want to make this all about Elon, but I'll ask one more question and beg your forbearance in your characteristic way of indulging me. It would be, if indeed that is a goal, to kind of do this, then what, who's advising him, or who's listening? Like, who does he listen to, if anybody? I mean, it seems like he does things so, whimsically, changing the name of Twitter, which had global brand recognition, to X, which has no recognition, could be a porn site. Who knows? My wife is concerned about this $8.99 every month I'm getting for X.com and XX.com. She doesn't know what that one's for. But also, he seems to listen, to kind of the average person, which is commendable. Like someone complains about some feature missing on Twitter, or some astronomers claim that these SpaceX satellite Starlinks are, polluting the sky, and he seems to take some interest and effort in that. But in terms of like the big picture, it doesn't seem like he listens to anyone, which is, could be a good trait. I've heard him say he doesn't give charity, he thinks it's all a scam. What do you make of his so-called, kitchen cabinet? Are there people that are, that he'll listen? I know you guys had an infamous Twitter space. I know you guys were close. Maybe still are. I'm not implying that you're not, but it seems like when you get to a certain level, if you don't listen to anybody, you're kind of setting yourself up for really Greek tragic downfall. And I wish him the greatest of success, obviously. But
I mean, I think he's always been pretty self-confident and chasing what he believes in without too much, advice taking from the side. But what I see happening is he's taking even less sort of advice than ever. And I think as he's gotten wealthier and, when you reach this point where you're the richest person in the world, the reality of life kind of fades away and you get into this very strange bubble. And he was never the easiest person to give critical feedback to. That was sort of like a life and death proposition for the rank and file employees at the company. There are people close to him who's, I've texted him when he was doing crazy things on Twitter, like, that's just too far. Don't do that. I remember when he switched off, he was threatening to switch off Starlink in Ukraine. I was texting him that weekend, and then like an hour later, he's like, okay, we'll leave it on again. So, I mean, he will change his mind if enough people go at him. But I think he's pretty much going to do what he's going to do, man. I mean, that's Elon's modus operandi. And he believes some of these things on like a religious level. I mean, the whole, his life's goal really for the last 20, 25 years has been to set up this human colony on Mars. And he sees that as like an existential risk and sort of the highest priority somebody could chase after. And he absolutely believes that in his heart. Like none of this has anything to do with making money or anything like that.
I mean, you'd think that he would want to listen to experts there, if not on, how to suppress, information on from the government or something. Listening to astronomers, people that study exobiology. He started a physics degree. I don't know if he finished it at UPenn. He was very interested in this notion. But, has anyone ever told him that if you took like all the biomass on the Earth that existed from 4.3 billion years ago up until today, and you just made a shell of it and you covered the Earth, it would cover less than 4 millimeters. And that, imagine like buttering Mars with slathering it with 4 millimeters of biomass. Even if you did that, the next day that would all be dead. So it's, even if you started with a 4 billion year head start, totally lifeless, totally pointless. And in fact, as I mentioned, hopefully we'll mention when I go to speak with Joe Rogan, the fact that we get these meteorites. This is a meteorite that I give away to people in my audience that have .edu email addresses. You can get that at briankeating.com/edu. because I love communicating to college kids and postdocs and professors. This came from, a supernova that blew up in our galaxy 5 billion years ago, perhaps. But I have a chunk of Martian meteorite that I'm getting Joe Rogan for his birthday. And, it's considerably more expensive. And yet that proves that materials come from Mars to the Earth and likewise go from Earth to Mars. And so there's constant what's called panspermia, one of those words that sounds dirty, but it's not. And it's going back and forth for billions of years, and yet there's zero probability of life or zero evidence of life on Mars and possibly anywhere else. So this dream of like extending it there, it might be better suited to the buzzword of the day, artificial intelligence, creating a monolith, as I'll ask you about later. It seems like he gets in his mind, he wants to do something. He's just going to do it. He has the resources of more than the top, the bottom, 190 countries on Earth. So can he just do anything? Anyway, I feel like it could set him up. I don't want to keep talking about him, but I do want to talk about an allied problem, which is the fact that these Starlink satellites and these other satellites that you talk about in the book are potentially a problem for optical astronomers like my colleagues. I dabble in optical astronomy. I can know my way around a telescope or two, Ashlee, don't worry. But the other thing is microwave astronomy. So we study the origin of the universe, which revealed itself in 1965 at the beginning of the space race at Bell Labs. Serendipitously, astronomers were looking to see if they could spot the very first commercial satellite, EchoStar, and they found that there was this irreducible background hiss of radiation. They couldn't get rid of it. That turned out to be the famous cosmic microwave background radiation, which butters my bread. That's how I make my living. I study it. Now, you can darken a satellite such that it's not visible to an optical telescope like this, But as long as it's above 0 degrees Kelvin, as every object in low Earth orbit is, as you know, it's actually close to 300 Kelvin. It's going to just be swamping our signals. Plus, they're broadcasting in the very signal bands that we enjoy. I want to ask you 2 questions. To what extent does the commercial space industry give a you-know-what about such concerns for our precious few windows into the cosmos? And 2, an allied question is, what are we going to do with all the junk? And those satellites become this chunk of meteorite. My Starlink's already out of date. So first question is, do they care? The commercializers. I know Elon sort of has a team dedicated to it, but the other ones that you write about, Rocket Lab, Final Lab, all these other companies, do they care?
I'll never forget. It was like when the first SpaceX rocket took the first batch of Starlink satellites up. All of a sudden, the astronomers were like, "Hey, this is gonna hurt, our field." I couldn't believe. I mean, I'd been following this as a semi-casual observer for years. It's like this was not like a secret, I mean, this was on a launch manifest for a really long time. I found it to be a very strange time to begin complaining about this and trying to sound the alarm, because I would argue whether these companies care or not, this ship has sailed. I mean, just in the last, from 1960 to 2020, we had about 2,500 satellites in low Earth orbit. That number went up, I don't know, about like 10 to 30 satellites per year. This was not like a exponential curve. In the last 3 years, it is an exponential curve where we've gone from 2,500 to 10,000. We're going to go to 100,000, maybe 200,000. So this is part of the reason I wrote the book. Was like, I mean, these are wonderful questions, but I think that these days are over. I would argue, astronomers and scientists, if they're going to find sort of the blessing in all this, is that the price to get a scientific instrument into space and to put it further into space is going to be lower, so much lower than ever before, that maybe there's like sort of a boon to science that can be done in that you have much better access than you had before. But sorry, I just don't even think it matters if these companies care or not, because there's so many of them and this is going to happen.
But what about the space junk problem? I mean, this is getting more and more, space is becoming not only a battlefield, but it's a junkyard. What are the deactivation protocols and so forth that are in place? Have they thought about that? Any of the companies? Not just
I mean, they've thought about it, but you could argue almost barely. I mean, this is like commercial space is moving so much faster all of a sudden than the regulatory bodies that were used to dealing with this. And there's the as far as I'm concerned, the company with like the best tools for monitoring debris is Leo Labs, and this is like a startup of about 50 people. Their technology is fantastic. They have their own antennas that came out of SRI in Silicon Valley. But, people should know that a lot of this hinges on like a, 8-year-old company. New Zealand is like the only country that I know of that has pretty serious legislation around you're responsible for what you put up there and how it deorbits, and there's real consequences to pay. Otherwise, it's pretty much the Wild West. Once you get a satellite into orbit, there's not a lot of consequence as to what happens. I think all these companies will have to be incented to make this work, or these billions of dollars in investment, are worthless. And the question is, can mankind, for the first time ever, get to some new territory, turn it into a capitalist exercise, and not screw it all up? That's sort of that's the gamble.
Yeah, it's good that you added in commercialize, because we actually the world was pretty successful in preventing that from happening in Antarctica, where I've been twice. I don't know if you've had a chance to visit there, but it's even more boring than space. No, it's not. There are parts of it that are quite amusing and lovely, but most of it's like this flat white sheet of ice that just goes on 700 nautical miles in all directions. But luckily, I only go there for a couple weeks, and you guys pay for it. Your taxpayers out there. But they established in 1956 a treaty that only allowed utilization of the continental shelf, if you will, at the whole continent, for non-commercial, non-militaristic purposes. And it seems like they thought, that was in 1956. So the commercial space industry had 75, plus years to figure this out or look to that as a model. Obviously, they want to use it commercially, although you could get a lot of minerals, resources, and just, sell real estate in Antarctica. It's 1/7 of the continental mass of the Earth, right? And plus it has all this free water, pure water. Anyway, were these things not thought about by government regulators? I mean, make it a condition that you must have a safe way to deorbit it, or was it like, well, China's not going to think about that, India's not, they're just going to deorbit and burn up whenever they want, or blow them up on purpose for military testing? Was there no foresight gleaned from our experience in Antarctica, Ashlee?
Well, I mean, I think it's kind of different because space had such obvious military applications and then commercial applications that I don't think would be apples to apples maybe with Antarctica. And then, I really think what happened was things were progressing. Okay, and I want to reiterate, my book is generally, I'm excited about all this stuff and optimistic. This is sort of like the down case for a lot of this, but it's hard to stress to people we had tried commercial space for 20, 25, 30 years, and it had largely been a failure. And so I don't think a lot of this felt real to regulators. And it's only within the span of about 5 years where SpaceX really hit its stride. Some of these other startups appeared. All of a sudden, we're on this exponential curve with the satellites that these questions are real. If you go back even like 3 years ago, the major rocket players were lucky to do one a month. SpaceX is now running almost one every 2 days. Rocket Lab's starting to get to like one a week. Like, this is a massive, very quick change. So you used to have a lot of time to contemplate these things and to try to slow things down. And that's over now because it is sort of like a land grab. Whoever gets there first really has an advantage. And so, I just think this is moving so much faster than regulators had any idea was coming.
So I want to turn to some of my audience questions, but I want to start with for my wonderful student who sent me the questions. It's just so lovely. He read and enjoyed the book. I'm going to make him post it as a review, one of your 50,000 reviews, Charles Coe. Thank you so much. So he was really enthralled by, the ability for these nerdy egghead scientists. I don't know if you ever heard this, Ashlee, but how do you know that a scientist is outgoing?
I don't know.
He looks at your shoes when he talks to you. Goes for engineers too. So the ability, it seems like, of these characters that you profile, and some of them come out so, it's just so wonderfully, portrayed, and their characters, even though, people like Chris Kemp or others, Peter Beck especially, they're not only good at the technical side of delivery of commercials, but they're good at the people management skills. Can you say anything about the commonalities in the 4 companies that you profiled? Is there, Charles wants to know, and I do too, is there a way to isolate their ability to spot talent? And is there a way that my audience, many of whom are PhDs and engineers or bachelor's engineers, that they can take lessons from this book and what to enable success in their own businesses?
I mean, it's an interesting observation because I don't know if I feel exactly the same way. I felt that one of my biggest revelations from doing this book, there were a number of these companies where I was able to be there basically from day one to follow their journey, which I'd never been able to do before, is to see a company from its start to its first major product. And, I've been reporting on business for decades now, and maybe this was naive on my part, but I was actually surprised at the influence a CEO has over the company and really how the company begins to sort of embody a lot of their personality. And so I was kind of surprised that each company had a very different flavor to me based on who was running it. And I tried to write the book where it essentially breaks into 4 different sections where each one had a bit of that same flavor, like some is the hero's journey, some's a comedy, some's a tragedy, and it sort of hinges a lot on the driving force behind the company. If there's a unifying factor, I don't think it's any genius insight. It's perseverance, and this stuff is hard. That's what I tried to, especially in the Astra section of the book. I wanted to make that like a bit of a tome to engineering. And even though space has this sort of sexy aura to it that, in the end, it comes down to grunt work and suffering through some pretty dark times and sort of just boring times sometimes waiting for a rocket to launch. And the people who've been the most successful, I really think of Elon and Peter Beck, faced tremendous odds and just would not be stopped from their dreams. That's really the sort of secret to their success. And they, Peter is quite unique. I would say Elon's probably better at business, a little less technical, and Peter's more technical and had never really had to run a business before, but was able and made mistakes, like huge mistakes. I mean, he gave away 50% of his company at the beginning and managed to get it back for $100,000, but learn the business stuff away. So it's sort of like adapting on the fly. But ultimately, perseverance and persistence, I think, win.
Yeah, it reminded me again. I'm kind of an Antarctic nerd, so I see a lot of stuff through that lens. And reportedly, there was a job ad that Shackleton's voyage had way back when, and it reminded me of some of the themes of When the Heavens Went on Sale. It says, men wanted for hazardous journey, low wages, bitter cold, long hours of complete darkness, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in event of success. Who knows? It could be apocryphal, but I thought it was kind of cute. A lot of these people, depend on a lot of luck. It's hard for a scientist or an engineer, as you know, to depend on luck. One of the companies, that's not. Well, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. Well, one of the most interesting things to me reporting this book was that, like, if you take Rocket Lab, I mean, this is a company in New Zealand, has no aerospace experience. Peter didn't go to college. The people from the United States were really not allowed to work there on the rocket because of government regulations. So you had a bunch of 20-somethings from Australia, New Zealand, a few Europeans. They were quite successful. I mean, the first rocket really, it was only safety regulators that kind of prematurely blew it up. Otherwise, they would have launched successfully on their first mission, which almost really has never happened, I think. And, in the U.S., we've had about, I don't know, depends where you draw the line, but say 10, 12 rocket startups who have really struggled. And these are companies that can borrow from Boeing and Lockheed and from SpaceX and all this talent. It was interesting to me that it's not just, like at Astra, they brought in a whole SpaceX team. Virgin Orbit brought in the whole huge chunk of the Falcon 1 team and went years and years without being able to launch. So there is some sort of magic that even without this knowledge that these teams come together to figure this out at somewhere like SpaceX or Rocket Lab, that there is something unique there. I'm not even sure I've been able to put my finger on it.
Yeah. And certainly it's not only large, deep pockets that can do it. I mean, for one thing, the U.S. space program is, has infinite budget, and they weren't able to really commercialize things, even like the space shuttle, which was supposed to launch once a week, when I was a kid, and ended up, 120 launches over 25 years or something like that, with two notable tragic events, which I want to get to in just a bit. But in the time we have left, I want to bring up a kind of a thought and get your reaction from one of your neighbors up there, Andy Weir, who's a past guest on the podcast and good friend. And actually, I can't say he's an alumnus of UC San Diego because he never graduated, but he's a good friend of our campus, and we love him. And his book, Artemis, which I don't know if you've read, he really makes the case that the only case for tourism or for space, commercialization, besides, satellites, communication, military stuff, for people being in space is tourism. And that's the big theme of the book, Artemis. I'm not, spoiling it, obviously. What do you make about that? Tourism, humans in space, and then, how would they react to a Challenger or Columbia type event? How would these companies react to such a thing?
Well, for people who don't know, it's I do not get into Mars. I don't get into the moon. I don't get into tourism. To me, the business case is very obviously right now, all the activity, major activity, is low Earth orbit and filling it full of satellites. I think we are building quite clearly the next layer of our technological infrastructure in low Earth orbit. I just see this as the next step in human progression, how viable space tourism becomes we have a long way to go between what Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic are doing now and a viable space tourism business, a really long way. I mean,
it's really technical space. I mean, it's suborbital, but for a lot of obviously it's orbital.
And these business models are not great. The experience is not great. SpaceX, yes, you could take a week-long journey. That would be awesome. That's still going to cost you many tens of millions of dollars to do today. Perhaps things change over time. I don't know. I get a little less excited about space tourism. I get more excited about what you brought up earlier, which I think is inevitable, which is either we all die on this planet in a few billion years, or we push our intelligence out into the universe. And to me, I mean, that's the bigger quest here, and what kind of interests me. People always ask, like, why are we even pursuing any of this stuff? I mean, otherwise, I think it gets hard to figure out what the point of any of this is if we're not pushing off this planet one day.
Well, one company that's not mentioned is sort of conspicuous to me, and I want to run my business proposition by you, and then I'll open it up to Series B funding, is Apple. And the reason I bring them up, unfortunately, last week, there's been tremendous tragedy in Lahaina, Maui, with, the whole town, which I love, and, I've visited many times, is basically burned up. And it's quite tragic. And there was a lot of, satellite imagery and forecasting and stuff, but actually Apple, released this new feature where they can do SOS communications with satellites directly. And I've reportedly it saved at least one family of 6 or 7 people's lives. And now they're saying even more people. I want to kind of take you through an idea that I had and prompted by something Elon said. Again, he's like Voldemort, we can't avoid it, but we shouldn't dwell on him too much. But, kind of putting satellites in orbit and also combining Apple with a handset, making the possibility, not just for I don't want to say just, but not only for rescuing human beings and providing, the greatest service one could ask for, but for like banking and putting, like cryptocurrency servers in space. So, they could have an independent network. And I think Apple's using old Iridium satellites or something like that, or Inmarsat. But the question I have is, are people thinking about a truly decentralized network, instant, sending, beaming at the speed of light, more or less, to Africa from San Diego, for example, sending cryptocurrency? And, Elon would probably have it be Dogecoin or whatever he calls it. So, what are the opportunities there? So getting like layer 2 companies, once the picks and shovels are there, what can be done, to enable things like global banking at the speed of light that's permissionless and decentralized?
This is what people don't really realize yet. I think we're at like 1996 internet, consumer internet. I think all these satellites, all these new, cheaper rockets going up more often. This is just laying fiber optic cables, building data centers all around the planet. We have like not even, the business cases around the current stuff, some of them are okay. Most of them seem terrible to me. What has to come next for this to actually work is a whole flood of new ideas. There were rumors, like I was chasing a story 5-6 years ago that Apple, when Starlink was kind of like just starting up, there were a lot of rumors that Apple was looking to build something similar to Starlink. And yes, I completely saw this as, okay, you have all these iPhones. Now you could just be your own global telco and have your own private network. Apple's so big on security and privacy. What better way to offer this to your consumers than to have this kind of global private network that works anywhere all the time? And I don't think people have yet understood, like, Starlink is not just about connecting your farmhouse to the internet or even like the 3.5 billion people who can't get fiber today. Starlink and all of its competitors, this is washing the world, coating the world in an always on high-speed internet connection is going to like change things in such a dramatic fashion that we can't even sort of fathom yet. I mean, I really think this is like the next step in the internet, and there's going to be so many businesses that come out of this. Like data centers in space, these private networks, I could totally see many companies wanting to run their own private network through their own satellites.
Yeah, that's just kind of a phenomenal opportunity. I can't really put my mind on exactly what's going to come up next, but yeah, I mean, if you have any stock tips confidential, let me know, Ashlee, please.
There's going to be young kids who figure this out. There were a lot of kids who were not interested in space for a long time because it got sort of boring on the commercial end. Now there's a lot of 20-somethings who are getting into this, and they're going to think up all kinds of stuff.
So last question of mine before we pivot to some audience questions, including a character in the book who I solicited a question from today, and it's not Elon, to disappoint my listeners. Hope to get him on the podcast someday because he's never talked to a real physicist, astronomer, as far as I can tell, on a podcast, and I would enjoy it. Is a work that you did, it came out last year, but it's about brain-computer interface, and this is in Bloomberg, and I should mention that you write a wonderful, semi-regular, I don't know how regular it is, but talk about your interest in these devices. I mean, the most commonly known one is, of course, Neuralink, but there are many others. So talk about this, Synchron's, a device that you wrote about last year. What's your interest there? Is this your next book, Ashlee? Give us the straight scoop.
Man, you're doing your research. I don't like that. this is
I love your work. I love your writing, and it really.
No, I appreciate it. I think this is something that I'm pursuing. It's hard to like figure out the timing on this, but it's an incredible time. Say sort of a similar thing. I mean, you had this technology that was quite academic for the last 25, 30 years. There's a thing called a Utah array, which is this kind of crude device we've been putting into people's heads to let them think and move stuff again. And then all of a sudden, same thing. A bunch of venture capital money poured into this. It's turned into a commercial exercise, and the technology has advanced at this incredibly rapid clip. So I just got back from Switzerland. There's a company called Onward. I saw 2 paralyzed people walk again through a spinal implant, and those spinal implants are now being combined with brain implants. It's like one of the most incredible, it's like hard to put into words.
It's so moving. Yeah.
Like, it's so moving and has changed their lives. People, we've already gotten so hung up on like the Matrix. I'm going to download Kung Fu or Spanish. Like, what people should know, my gut is telling me, in the next 10 years, people with ALS, Parkinson's, if you've had a stroke, if you've been paralyzed, I mean, your life is going to get much, much better, I think, without overpromising to people. But yeah, so this is a fascinating field. Neuralink is like the best funded, most ambitious, highest risk of all them, and is really trying to be like the general purpose machine. Some people are focused just on the spine or just on the brain. Neuralink kind of wants to do it all. I have a big story coming out on Neuralink. I've been going there for about 3 years. I'm not sure exactly when it'll come out, but in the next like month or two. And so, yes, no, I think it's a fascinating area. I think it's to me like maybe the most exciting tech area. If Neuralink is successful, you may remember Elon Musk like for that company first and foremost before any of the others.
Yeah, I agree. This has such revolutionary benefit right now, right here on Earth, with people that are otherwise, kind of completely disabled or, majority disabled. So to me, that's a very special mission that he has. And of course, all these companies, I hope that they all succeed. I mean, it's not like a finite pie where, some person can solve it. It's going to be a monopoly on, curing paralysis. So it's idiotic, right? Okay, so I solicited questions online. Just a reminder to my audience, you can always send me questions from my audience. I try to do it a little bit more in advance than I did today, but nevertheless, on Twitter, Dr. Brian Keating, or Instagram, The Brian Keating, or YouTube, Dr. Brian Keating, where this interview will show up. And if you're listening to it, you should check out all those venues and leave me questions for my esteemed guests that come on. So I asked a friend of mine who is mentioned in the book, and his name is Creon Levitt. He said, he has a question for you. Can you give your analysis of the importance of both Pete Worden and Robert Zubrin on the new space activities you chronicle in your book, including, but not limited to, their effects on SpaceX and NASA?
Clearly, Robert had this, he seemed to have some influence on Elon and this whole Mars quest before SpaceX really formally started. And I think probably like helped cement some of these ideas in Elon's head. And so maybe he gets a ton of credit to actually like actualizing SpaceX and making Elon chase that dream. I tend to find Robert's stuff a little more, I know he does his research, he's very bright. It's just a little more pie in the sky to me. I think Pete is for me a little bit more of a man of action who, has had to run very large programs with huge budgets and whose work has had major consequences out in the world. And for the stuff that I'm interested in around this commercial space, very clearly like has had an impact. And I just know Pete so much better. I think the world would benefit a lot from more people like Pete Worden. I mean, there's a guy who's like a Republican, maybe a libertarian at heart, a military guy, but he surrounds himself with a bunch of hippies and people who think the opposite of him. And he's willing to not only hear them out, but help them and support them. He's a relentless fighter of bureaucracy and groupthink. And, obviously, I think the world, if the government had more people like Pete, we'd be in great shape.
Yeah. Government comes off in a very positive light in this wonderful book, On the Heavens Went on Sale. Let me ask the final question from from a Twitter subscriber. Huyslet, I think is how you pronounce it. Husyelt. She said, thank him for covering Planet Labs. Their impact has been incredible. highlight on the space industry. He wants to know from you, would NASA ever help fund a private crewed mission to, let's say, Venus, flyby, if the data science returns were good, or would they stick to just renting vehicles? And I know that NASA is planning a crewed voyage. Did you hear about the crewed voyage to the sun, Ashlee?
What? No.
Yeah, they're going at night. They're going at night. So, what do you think about this idea of sending commercial or private crewed missions instead of just the macho and machete, astronauts that are coming on Artemis?
I mean, the line's blurring pretty quick, isn't it? You know, and there gets to be a point here very soon where, I mean, SpaceX is like, can do this stuff whatever it wants. You've got startups that are putting these private crews and missions together. I mean, how long does it make sense to have like in 12 years, we're going to send these few people off? You know what I mean? I mean, it's looking like a little bit more, I wouldn't say like commonplace, but a little bit closer to sort of day-to-day life at this point. If it's something like going to Venus, okay, maybe that has to be like a special government-backed mission. But anyway, you know, I just think this line is blurring. I think God willing, we're at like the last stages of the government trying to fund things like SLS and sort of getting out of the way to actually help support things exactly like that commenter is talking about, where, you know, the best parts of NASA's smarts that are in areas SpaceX and Blue Origin and Rocket Lab haven't covered can come into play. So yeah, I mean, we're at such a strange, interesting time where there's so much commercial space activity, but you still have this government, especially somewhere like China. It's obviously government-led. Somewhere like Russia, the United States is this strange hybrid. It's unclear to me how this plays out in terms of like who is planting the flag for some of these big missions and where, you know, like where business and science kind of end. Like I assume the moon is pretty much going to be a capitalist exercise now. You know, like Mars is probably like in between, and beyond Mars is probably more of a government thing.
I think you're right. Okay, we have time maybe for one last question from me. That's the host prerogative. But before that, can you say anything about your HBO projects that you're working on, the space one?
I wish I could say more. I can't. So throughout the whole course of this book, I had a film crew with me. We making a documentary for HBO. People will be, when I can announce my fellow producers, they'll be quite impressed, I think. But it's going to be great. You know, it's a little more focused than the book, a smaller set of characters, but it was amazing. So we got to film like at Astra, you know, on day one, you get to see like what a rocket company looks like to be formed from scratch. Like nobody's ever had a camera in some of this stuff. I went to Ukraine. I'm the only Western reporter ever to get a camera into the old ICBM factories, the old Soviet rocket engine testing sites. So, you know, I think especially for space nerds, it'll be exciting. And then obviously I always try to bring stuff to a mainstream audience and explain all this stuff to everybody.
You're a remarkable storyteller, and I think that's such a rare commodity in the age of, you know, ChatGPT, which generated all the questions. No, I'm just kidding. I don't want to call my undergraduate a chat what do they call it? The transformer, although it beats the eye. Ashlee, I want to conclude. I usually ask 4 questions in my patented final 4 questions, but we only have time for one. They're all inspired in one way or another by phrases of the great Arthur C. Clarke, who came up with not an insignificant amount of technology and ideas, at least in science fiction, in fact, related to space, including 2001: A Space Odyssey, but also the idea of allegedly of geosynchronous satellites and things like the iPad and artificial intelligence, which I have in the back over here. But so I want to ask a question inspired by him, which is his famous aphorism that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. In your career, you've encountered tremendous numbers of technologists as a reporter, Bloomberg, and many, many wonderful books and hopefully future books. What is the most magical thing, the thing that human beings should have a little bit of swagger collectively as a species about, that you've ever encountered, know about, or have ever pondered about, that we should justifiably think as close to magic as technology can provide?
Oh man, you stuck this one on me. I feel like I should give this some real deep thought.
Has to ever watch the podcast, which is okay. It's okay.
God, I don't know if this answer will be satisfactory to people, and maybe it's lame, but I think open source software is like such an incredible human achievement that we take for granted. I mean, it's essentially like the fabric that runs the entire modern world, that we were somehow able to like take the best parts of human nature and have people willing to collaborate and share their ideas on this level and have it become this like integral, inescapable part of our modern world. I mean, it really, to me, it's like the best parts of human nature. And like, I think the average person has no idea about open source software at all, or sort of what it entails. But to me, it's incredible. It's like everything you dream of, the world coming together to solve problems in a magical way.
I thought you were going to say the pyramids, or but I've never heard something that's not hardware. But that is a wonderful answer. I want to thank you so much, and remind my audience you can always connect with me and my wonderfully just esteemed guests, including Ashlee. Hopefully, we'll get you for a part 2. Maybe we'll get in person. I'll give you one of these meteorites. But
I want the Mars one, man. Come on, my birthday's next month.
All right, cool. Send me your address. I will send you a Martian rock, I promise. Ashlee Vance, New York Times bestseller, one of the best storytellers I've ever read. Enjoy your rest of your day. Thank you for making the time to chat with me and my audience, and really appreciate all of your writing, but especially your newest wonderful book, When the Heavens Went on Sale. Thank you, Ashlee.
Thank you, Brian.